A soft mist rolls in from the Atlantic, drifting slowly across hills that rise and fall like the breath of the land itself. Along narrow, winding lanes, lined with dry stone walls and hedges of hawthorn, early light spills across dew-soaked grass. A gentle hush clings to the countryside. In the distance, smoke curls slowly from the chimneys of thatched cottages, and the bleat of a sheep echoes faintly through the morning air. The land is green, deep, restful green, the kind that seems to hold stories in its soil. Here, in this quiet part of the world, life once moved with a steady, calming rhythm. The fire in the hearth burned low and constant. Wooden spoons stirred thick potato stews. Children played with willow switches and chased chickens near shallow streams. The days were measured by the needs of the field, the warmth of the hearth, and the setting of the sun. A simple life, shaped gently by seasons, shared songs, and familiar footsteps. Ireland in the early 1800s was a land of beauty and burden, a place where every stone in the path held a name, every patch of earth a memory. It was a country shaped by long histories and quiet hopes, where families clung tightly together in cottages beside their plots of land. Most of all, it was a place where the potato was more than a crop. It was comfort. It was nourishment. It was the anchor of the day. Welcome to Sleepy Journeys, the podcast designed to lull you into a peaceful slumber with soothing stories through time, places, and ideas. Whether you're winding down after a long day or simply looking for a peaceful escape, you're in the right place. My name's Jack, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. Each night on Sleepy Journeys, we set off together on gentle adventures designed to soothe your mind and ease you into rest. You'll find journeys through history, comforting fairy tales, myths and folklore, the wonders of science, fascinating inventions, inspiring famous figures, music history, and even calm explorations around the world. No matter where your curiosity takes you, there's a dreamy Sleepy Journeys show for you. Tonight, we're going to step quietly into the story of the Irish Potato Famine. And just before we fully drift off, if you're enjoying Sleepy Journeys, go ahead and tap follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're joining me on. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming sleepy adventures. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us. Now, take a deep breath and let's begin. As we start this journey, picture again the quiet green hills, the low stone walls, the hush of dawn in a small Irish village. A pot simmers over the hearth. A wooden chair creaks as someone rises slowly to begin the day. The world outside is simple, and the rhythm of life is steady. For a long time, this was the shape of comfort. And it's here, in this gentle space, that our story begins. The heart of Ireland in the early 19th century beat gently in the countryside. Life in the villages and rural lanes followed a rhythm so familiar, so deeply rooted, that time itself seemed to move more slowly there. The fields, shaped by hands that knew every furrow and stone, rolled out in soft waves beyond the low stone walls. Each morning, the light crept slowly across the land, warming the thatch on cottage roofs and casting long shadows through hedgerows. Cottages, small and whitewashed, stood tucked into the folds of the landscape. Their walls were thick with lime wash, their windows small, and their chimneys always whispering smoke into the air. Inside, the fire was never allowed to die. Its glow was the center of everything, for warmth, for cooking, for light during the short winter days. Around it, families gathered on rough-hewn stools or benches, sharing stories passed from mouth to mouth like songs remembered in sleep. The people here lived close to the earth. Each day began with small tasks done in soft silence, gathering eggs from the hens, fetching water from the well, checking on the goats or the pig. The land asked for attention, care, and time. Neighbors passed each other on the lane with quiet greetings. Children ran barefoot through grassy paths, their laughter light and far off, like birds startled into flight. Inside the homes, meals were modest but full of comfort. A pot simmered on the hearthstone, filled with potatoes, sometimes with a bit of milk, sometimes an onion or cabbage leaf if the garden allowed. Bread, when there was flour, was baked on a griddle. Butter was churned in small wooden tubs, its making a slow process that matched the pace of the day. Evenings arrived gently. As the sky turned violet and then blue, the fire was banked and the shutters drawn. Oil lamps were lit if needed, though many chose to sit in the soft half-light, speaking in low voices or listening to the ticking of the clock, the crackle of the fire, or the wind brushing against the thatch. Songs were sung quietly, lullabies for the little ones, or verses passed down from grandmother to granddaughter. This was a world of feet planted firmly in soil and lives shaped by cycles older than memory. There was hardship, of course, winters that bit at the bones, work that bent the back, but there was also steadiness, a deep and grounding sense of enough. As the moon rose high over the fields, the land fell into hush. No carriages passed. No machines groaned. Only the slow breath of cattle in their sheds, the rustle of trees beyond the wall, and the soft sigh of sleep settling over the hills. In the gentle patchwork of fields behind each cottage, the humble potato was more than a crop. It was the rhythm of life itself. Planted with careful hands in the spring, those small dark seeds were buried in the cool earth, tucked beneath rows of hoed soil and covered with fresh compost. In soft weather and sunlit days, shoots emerged, pushing green leaves toward the sky. Those leaves whispered growth, and beneath them, the tubers swelled in the soil, hidden and quiet. By midsummer, when the heather bloomed violet and bees drifted through the air, the rows of potato plants stood tall. The green leaves formed gentle arches above the ridges, their undersides alive with the soft rustle of morning breeze. Farmers and families walked along the lines, fingers brushing against foliage as though greeting an old friend. Children followed close behind, carrying baskets small enough for their hands, hoping for the tiniest tuber to drop at their feet. When harvest time came in autumn, there was a shared hush in the air. The soil, dark and damp, released its cargo as hands dug carefully between the plants. Torches or lanterns lit evening gatherings when the first tubers were brought home, rough, dusty, full of promise. They were washed in cold water from the well, then placed in clay pots or crockery and carried to the hearth. An evening meal might be humble, a few boiled spuds, perhaps butter or milk, sometimes a cabbage leaf or onion simmered together. And yet within that simplicity lay something ancient and comforting. It was the result of seasons of patient care. It was the bond of families sharing warmth around the fire. It was the sustaining gift of the land. The potato held stories too, the lineage of seed passed from grandmother to daughter, the variation in shapes and taste found in each year's harvest, the hope any few extra kept for the long winter ahead. It was a quiet treasure, simple and complete. In winter months, when the nights lengthened and the cold pressed against shutters, stores of potatoes were taken from cellars or tubs and boiled for supper. The spuds, soft and yielding, carried the taste of summer warmth. A single bowl was enough to fill bellies and hearts, a reminder of earth and care and the lifeblood of community. The potato was steady in a world shaped by weather and season. It anchored families to place, to time, and to each other. In every small meal, that potato spoke of togetherness. It was comfort and survival woven through daily breath. And when the blight came, it would challenge all of that. But for now, the humble potato ruled the ridge, fed the hearth, and cradled generations through the seasons. The air in late summer carried a stillness that felt unfamiliar. The skies, though soft with scattered clouds, seemed to hold something new, a tension folded into the warmth. In the fields, where the potato plants had stood lush and proud only weeks before, subtle changes crept in like shadows just before dusk. Leaves that once swayed with quiet energy began to wilt. Their green turned a shade darker, less vibrant, edged with brown. Some curled at the edges. Others drooped with a quiet exhaustion. At first, few noticed. A dry spell, perhaps. A trick of sun and soil. Farmers walked their ridges as they always did, adjusting their straw hats and lifting the corners of their shawls against the wind. But the leaves did not recover. Where new blossoms should have appeared, there were none. And then, one morning, the first signs of something unmistakable, a dark spot on a leaf, soft and wet, like ink spilled on fabric. Children who played among the ridges paused, eyes wide, fingers brushing the strange decay. When they returned home, their stories were quiet, almost whispered. The plants are turning black. Mothers examine them with furrowed brows, while fathers trace the veins of the dying leaves with calloused thumbs. The change spread quickly. Each morning brought new damage, new rot. The vines sagged. The flowers dropped. Then the roots themselves, when unearthed, revealed potatoes that were soft, streaked with brown, smelling faintly of rot even before they touched the basket. What had once been firm and solid now collapsed in the palm, as if the earth itself had grown tired. No one knew what to name it. Some blamed a strange fog that had come across the sea, a ghostly veil that seemed to rise with the tide and drift across the fields. Others looked to omens in the sky, odd patterns in the weather, tales from old songs that warned of curses or hidden sorrows. But the truth was quieter and more cruel. A fungus, invisible to the eye, had woven itself into the lifeblood of the plant, destroying it from the inside. The ridges that had once promised plenty now lay streaked with ash-colored leaves and broken stems. Where once voices rose in harvest song, now silence settled. The baskets were left behind, empty. The fields no longer offered their gift. Still, hope lingered. Perhaps another patch would survive. Perhaps the early rot was just a passing blight. In a land so familiar with hardship, the instinct to wait, to endure, ran deep. Fires were still lit. Pots were still filled. But already, a shift had begun, a deep, slow turning in the soil of daily life. The green hills watched quietly as the first wave passed, unaware that it was only the beginning. The breeze, once full of summer's warmth, now carried the faint scent of something missing. As the days shortened and the autumn winds picked up, a hush began to spread across the countryside. It was not the usual quiet of harvest ending or of hearths warming for winter. It was heavier, slower, like a pause held in breath. In the cottages scattered across the valleys and hills, people spoke in low voices, leaning close as they sat by the fire. They asked the same questions again and again, though answers did not come. What had happened to the crop? Would it grow again next year? Was this some strange turn of weather, or something more? Worry moved softly from home to home. In churches, during Sunday prayers, farmers bowed their heads a little longer. Eyes stayed closed in reverence and quiet pleading. In market towns, where words spread quickly, conversations gathered under the eaves of thatch-roofed inns, around the corners of empty stalls. A merchant might have heard of another village, one where the rot came faster. A traveler might mention a cousin whose field was completely lost. Each story added to the hush. Still, daily life tried to continue. Bread was baked, though more sparingly. Root cellars were checked more often, and even the smallest potatoes were carefully cleaned and stored. Parents found ways to stretch what little they had, filling bellies with broth and kindness. Children noticed, but often said nothing, sensing the shift in tone, the way hands moved more slowly, the way the adults lingered a little longer at the table, staring into the last of the fire. In some homes, neighbors gathered close. They shared what they could, a jug of milk, a wedge of cheese, a few onions from a garden that had fared better. These small exchanges brought warmth that wasn't only in the food. It was the comfort of being seen, of not being alone in uncertainty. In others, the silence deepened. Pride and fear settled like dust on shelves. Some were ashamed to speak of their empty bins, their spoiled stores. Doors stayed closed a little longer. Paths between cottages grew less worn. The sound of evening songs faded. Outside, the land prepared for winter as it always did, the trees shedding their leaves, the frost lacing the grasses. But there was something unfamiliar in the air, a stillness that didn't feel restful. The usual joy of gathering wood, of watching the smoke curl from chimneys, was tempered now by the thought of meals that might grow smaller, of stores that might not last. Yet even within the worry, a quiet strength held. People turned to the rituals they knew. They folded their hands in prayer. They told old stories by firelight. They stitched and swept and cared for animals. They watched the sky, hoping it might change. And all across the hills and villages of Ireland, the same feeling crept in, that this was not just a poor season, but the beginning of something harder to name. Winter arrived with slow encroachment, frost on window panes that lingered longer each morning, smoke curling into pale skies, and winds that brushed through the hedgerows with cold fingers. Inside the cottages, the hearth remained the heart of the home, But the fire was watched more closely. Turf was used with care. Each stick of kindling felt a little more precious. And around the table, silence often settled deeper than before. The meals had grown smaller. A single boiled potato, when found, was split between 3. Broth was stretched with whatever could be gathered: a sprig of nettle, a shred of cabbage leaf, a splash of buttermilk. Some tried roasting turnips or grating roots, remembering recipes shared by grandparents long gone. Others simply stirred the pot and hoped for warmth, if not fullness. The sound of a spoon against a wooden bowl grew familiar. The creak of a chair as someone leaned in, trying to find comfort and closeness, became part of the evening rhythm. In many homes, a single candle lit the table, its flames swaying gently, casting soft shadows across the walls. There was no laughter now, only the slow murmur of prayer, the low hum of remembered songs, the silence between breaths. Children curled beneath wool blankets, heads resting on knees, hands tucked in sleeves. Mothers wrapped their shawls tighter. Fathers stepped outside to stare at the sky, searching for answers in the stars. Hunger whispered. It settled into the body like fog on the hills, dulling movement, slowing thought, making each task a little heavier. Still, life continued. Water was fetched, though it felt colder against skin. Chickens were tended, even as their numbers dwindled. The pig, if still there, was spoken of less often, its presence a quiet reassurance, its future a decision no one wanted to name aloud. Some families moved in with others, bringing together what they had left: a few sacks of oats, a patch of firewood, stories to keep the long nights bearable. Beds were shared, meals combined, warmth held between bodies pressed close beneath patched quilts. In these moments, sorrow and love lived side by side. One did not chase the other away. They simply shared space, like candlelight and shadow. Outside, the fields lay quiet beneath the frost. The rows of ridges, once full of promise, now stood like ghost lines in the earth. Snow dusted the stones along the lane. Smoke rose from fewer chimneys. Footsteps in the snow often led to doors that no longer opened. Yet inside, in every corner where light still glowed, people endured. They spoke in low voices, rocked infants to sleep, folded hands in prayer, and waited for the return of the soil's gift. They did not speak of spring with certainty, but they carried its memory, tucked somewhere beneath their weariness. And in that memory, in that waiting, hope remained. Even in the stillness of winter and the deep ache of hunger, kindness moved through the villages like a quiet stream under frost. In the soft knock at a door, in the placing of a loaf of bread wrapped in linen, in the sharing of the last apple from the tree that had borne only a few. These moments, small and nearly silent, became lifelines woven into the fabric of each day. Neighbors looked out for one another in ways that required no speech. An elderly woman found her firewood restacked neatly each morning. A mother with many children discovered a small basket of eggs left by her step each week. These gifts were often given under the cover of dusk, left without a name, as if the wind had simply remembered them. Those who had a little gave it. Those who had none still found ways to offer presents, a story, a song. Sometimes, people gathered in one cottage to cook together, combining their few ingredients into a single pot: potatoes that had survived, a few carrots from a sheltered garden, bits of dried herbs. The meal was thin, but the warmth of company made it whole. Children shared toys made from bits of straw and cloth. Old stories were told of mythical creatures, of brave ancestors, of clever animals who always found their way home. Laughter still found its place and had the power to soften the edges of sorrow. The priest, or school teacher, or midwife in the village often became the center of these quiet exchanges. They organized food relief when letters could be sent, or led the simplest prayers when words felt hard to find. They listened. They remembered names. They noticed who hadn't been seen in days and made the quiet journey to knock on a door. In some places, small gatherings were held in barns or chapels, not for worship alone, but to keep one another warm. Wool shawls and patchwork quilts were shared across shoulders, and the heat of many bodies together kept the worst of the cold at bay. Someone might play a fiddle softly, the tune rising slowly in the dim air like mist rising from a cup of tea. Feet tapped gently. Smiles flickered and stayed. Even as hunger deepened and the future grew more uncertain, these acts of shared care built something stronger than the blight's reach. Each act was a thread, fragile perhaps, but when woven together, they held fast. In times when food could not be found, people still gave what they could: time, warmth, attention, belief. And in doing so, they made space for the spirit to rest. They reminded one another that hardship could not hollow out love, that even among bare fields and cold fires, human kindness still lived. It did not cure the hunger, but it soothed the soul. The decision to leave arrived slowly, like a tide rising through stones. Families, once tethered to their land for generations, found themselves standing at crossroads marked by hunger, silence, and dreams whispered in twilight. Fog often clung to the harbors in the early mornings, soft and heavy, wrapping the masts and ropes of ships in gentle veils. The docks were filled with footsteps and quiet voices, with the creak of wood and the lapping of water against worn hulls. There were few goodbyes spoken aloud. They lived instead in glances held a moment longer, in hands that lingered before letting go, in eyes that carried more than words could hold. The ships bound for America or Canada or Australia waited like quiet giants. Their decks were crowded, their holds made ready for those bringing all they owned in bundles and baskets. Families clutched small bags filled with linen, bread, and keepsakes, a worn book, a locket, a handful of earth wrapped in cloth. Children nestled against their parents, not quite understanding the size of the change ahead. For many, this was their first sight of the sea. The air smelled of salt and damp wood, and the gulls wheeled silently overhead. Some knelt to pray before boarding, their fingers tracing small crosses in the air. Others stared out over the water, eyes fixed on nothing, hearts too full to look back. Those left behind stood along the ridges and hills above the ports, watching sails disappear into the mist. Letters, if sent, took weeks or months. Often, they never came at all. But in the soft hills of Ireland, the memory of departure left footprints that never faded. The ships rocked gently on the waves as they pulled away, their sails billowing like breaths caught on the wind. The travelers huddled below deck, lulled to sleep by the rhythm of the ocean, often in exhaustion. Dreams came, heavy and muddled, filled with images of fields left behind and lands yet unseen. The farewells were rarely dramatic. They were slow, full of quiet dignity. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it carried within it a small flame of hope that somewhere, across the water, life might again find a steadier rhythm. And behind them, Ireland watched from the mist, the hills still green, the stone walls still standing, the stories still held gently in the land. The first sight of the New World often came through a haze, morning fog lifting to reveal unfamiliar coastlines, harbors bristling with wooden piers, and cities rising slowly like mirages through the sea mist. The ships docked in places whose names had only been spoken in hushed tones: Boston, New York, Quebec. The journey across the ocean was done, but a different kind of passage was just beginning. Stepping off the ship, the land beneath their feet felt both firm and foreign. The accents were strange, the air smelled of coal and city soot, and the crowds moved in unfamiliar ways. Some were met by family already settled, their faces older and wearier. Others arrived alone, carrying only hope and a name they repeated carefully to officials who marked it down, often misspelled, in ledgers that never looked back. The Irish who landed on these new shores came with little, but within them they carried songs, sayings, and a strength formed in hardship. They settled into neighborhoods that rose quickly near the docks, clusters of tenements, alleyways, and shared boarding houses. The rooms were small, but in them, life continued. Each morning brought new sounds: the clatter of wagons, the call of vendors, the rhythmic hum of work. Many took jobs others had turned down, cleaning streets, digging canals, sewing garments, or laying the very foundations of the cities themselves. It was hard, often thankless labor, but it offered coins, and with coins came bread, shelter, a bit of rest. The Irish brought music with them, and it echoed through alleys and courtyards. Fiddles played at gatherings, songs were sung softly in kitchens, and stories were told with laughter that lifted even tired spirits. The lilting rhythms, though far from the green hills of home, wove their way into local melodies. Over time, those sounds, Irish reels, slow airs, ballads, seeped into the very tone of the places where they lived. In church halls and city squares, they built new forms of community. Irish names filled parish rolls. Festivals began to reflect both old traditions and new lives. Even in hardship, they found ways to hold on to identity through Sunday masses, through Gaelic phrases passed to children, through the practice of gathering often and eating together when food allowed. Though discrimination followed them, and signs sometimes read, "No Irish need apply," they endured with quiet determination. Their presence was undeniable. Streets were swept, bricks were laid, songs were sung, and slowly, the sound of their voices became part of the city's own. Generations later, those early footsteps could still be traced in a child learning to play a tune on a tin whistle, in the green ribbons pinned to lapels in March, in the stories passed around dinner tables long after the names had blurred. The journey across the sea had not erased who they were. It had only widened the place where they could belong. Across the countryside, long after the famine had ebbed, the land held the memory of those who had once walked its paths. In valleys where smoke had once risen from dozens of chimneys, now only a few wisps curled into the sky. The fields, once vibrant with rows of green ridges, now lay fallow, their furrows softened by time and overgrown with wildflowers. Stone cottages, their roofs long since caved in, stood as silent sentinels to lives once lived within. Walking through these places in springtime, when the gorse began to bloom and the birds returned to sing, one could still sense the echoes. There was the outline of a hearth, blackened with age. There, a doorstep worn smooth by generations of feet. A lone apple tree might stand in what was once a garden, its blossoms falling like soft reminders of care and tending now gone. The roads leading to these forgotten places were still there, though narrowed by grass and rarely walked. Stone walls, broken in places, guided the eye to where a village might have been. Sometimes, moss had crept over names carved into stone lintels. Other times, it was the shape of the land, the gentle rise that suggested a barn once stood there, or a patch of daffodils blooming where a woman might have planted them long ago. Absence in Ireland had a shape. It did not feel like emptiness. It felt like waiting. The people who had once filled these places had not disappeared. They had simply stepped into another part of the world, across seas, into cities, into stories that continued elsewhere. But their footprints remained. The fields remembered them. The hills still held their songs. In quiet churchyards, gravestones told pieces of the tale. Some were carved with care, others marked only by stones stacked in a careful heap. The dates clustered around the famine years, a span of sorrow held gently in lichen and weather-worn lines. Those who remained in Ireland walked among these traces with reverence. They tended the ruins with quiet hands, planting flowers nearby, placing small tokens on stone sills, a smooth pebble, a bit of ribbon, a folded piece of paper with words written in Gaelic. The memory of those lost was kept through tending, through walking, through remembering. Even now, on certain hillsides when the wind moves just right, it seems to carry something older, the scent of peat smoke, the faint sound of footsteps on a dirt path, the hum of a lullaby once sung beside a fire. These are echoes, living softly in the land, gently reminding all who passed that once many lives grew here. They loved, they worked, they hoped, and though they are gone, they have never truly left. Ireland remembers them, in stone, in soil, in silence. Though voices quieted and homes emptied, music never left the land. In the stillness that followed the famine, it became a thread woven through every quiet place, a gentle, living memory. Along winding lanes and in the corners of candlelit cottages, tunes were played that carried more than melody. They carried grief, resilience, remembrance, and love. The fiddle, often scratched and worn from years of use, would rest against a shoulder and sing stories without words. Soft airs drifted slowly through the air, meandering like a stream across stones. Each note held a world, the touch of a mother's hand, the warmth of a lost hearth, the strength of those who endured. The tin whistle followed, high and bright in tone, weaving around the fiddle's deeper voice like birds in the morning sky. These weren't songs of triumph, nor were they heavy with sorrow. They were balanced, like the sea against the shore, tender, honest, and deeply rooted. They were often played without introduction, passed from father to son, mother to daughter. Some had lyrics, though many were simply hummed or remembered in silence. In village gatherings, when the light was low and supper finished, someone might begin a tune. Others joined in slowly, filling the space with harmony and breath. Even those who had little would tap their feet or sway gently with closed eyes. And through those evenings, though food might be scarce, the music was plentiful. Ballads rose too, soft poems sung with care, verses layered with imagery and rhythm. They told of boats crossing oceans, of young love waiting beneath hawthorn trees, of lands lost and found again. Some spoke of the famine directly, with simple words that held great weight. Others carried it quietly in metaphor, allowing the listener to feel rather than hear the truth. Outside of Ireland, in places where Irish families had made their new homes, the music took root just as firmly. In New York streets and Canadian towns, in Queensland fields and Boston bars, fiddles and flutes reawakened memory. Gatherings continued, small, vibrant, full of the same songs once played in stone cottages far away. The music adapted, but its heart never changed. In this way, the famine was never forgotten. It lived gently in each tune, each pause, each sway of a melody long remembered. The land might have changed, the names might have shifted, but the songs remained. Today, in Irish pubs, at family gatherings, in classrooms and quiet corners of the world, those tunes are still played. A child presses a bow to strings. An elder taps time with a well-worn shoe. And somewhere, someone hums a verse learned from a grandparent, the words soft and sure. Music, like memory, does not fade. It moves through time like a stream through valleys, quiet, enduring, and full of life. After the famine, Ireland did not return to what it had been. The land was quieter, the villages smaller, the laughter more measured. But in the stillness that followed, something deep took root, a soft strength, shaped by loss, but not defined by it. The people who remained learned to live gently with the past, to carry its weight with care, and to build again, slowly, like moss returning to stone. Fields were tilled once more, but with fewer hands. Crops diversified, and while the potato still held a place at the table, it no longer bore the entire burden of survival. Gardens stretched a little wider. Chickens and goats were raised with tender attention. Families kept bees, spun wool, and found quiet pride in self-sufficiency. Homes were mended. Thatch was laid anew. Doors that had once swung shut with sorrow were reopened to sunlight and visitors. Children born after the famine grew up hearing its stories. The stories weren't embellished. They were told plainly, with reverence and calm. In schools, teachers taught not just reading and numbers, but resilience. They passed on folk songs and legends, as well as the quiet lessons of growing food, tending to others, and listening. Faith remained a thread that held many together as a comfort. In chapels and along paths lined with stone crosses, prayers were said for those lost and those who carried on. The land itself seemed to join in the healing. New trees sprouted in abandoned places. Wildflowers overtook unused ridges, bringing color to fields once known for sorrow. Birds returned, nesting in chimneys and hedgerows. The rhythm of seasons softened, and in that softness, life moved again. This strength was found in small gestures, in a hand resting on a shoulder, in bread shared without asking, in gardens replanted with quiet hope. Communities gathered for wakes and weddings, for festivals and market days. Music, once again, was played not only for remembrance, but for celebration. The Irish spirit adapted. Each step forward carried the memory of what had come before. And that memory, rooted deeply, gave rise to endurance. Soft strength is what grew where hunger had once taken hold. And with it came a gentle joy, cautious perhaps, but sincere. A joy found in the scent of peat smoke, in the ripple of a stream, in the warm weight of a loaf of bread placed on the table at the end of the day. Ireland had not been broken. It had been shaped. And from that shaping came a resilience woven from soil and story and the steady hum of life continuing. Today, Ireland is a land where past and present meet in gentle harmony. The same green fields stretch across the countryside, the same stone walls meander through hills, and the same sea air drifts in from the Atlantic. Yet beneath this familiar surface, a quiet transformation has unfolded, one shaped by memory, resilience, and a deep reverence for what has come before. In small villages and bustling cities alike, reminders of the famine rest respectfully alongside everyday life. A plaque on a wall, a statue in a quiet square, a famine garden blooming with native plants. Each offers space for reflection. These places are visited by locals and descendants of those who once crossed the ocean, returning to walk paths once trodden by great-grandparents. The Irish people carry the memory of the famine woven through their language, their songs, their food. In kitchens across the island, traditional dishes are made with both modern flair and ancestral touch. Soda bread, col cannon, and stews rich with root vegetables find their way to tables, often served with stories of how the recipe came to be. In schools, children learn the history not only from textbooks, but from field trips to famine cottages and heritage sites. They listen to the tales told in gentle tones by elders who remember their own grandparents' stories. Museums preserve letters written in slanted script, maps marked with vanished villages, and tools used in both survival and rebuilding. And every year, across Ireland, National Famine Commemoration Day is marked with ceremonies of respect and remembrance. Flags are lowered, wreaths are laid, and songs are sung in Irish. Modern Ireland thrives in many ways. Its cities are centers of art, education, and innovation. But even amid the pulse of contemporary life, the quiet past is never far. It is there in the folds of a wool shawl, in the scent of peat smoke, in the echo of a fiddle played on a breezy evening. It lives in the poetry, in the Gaelic phrases exchanged on country roads, in the way people greet one another with warmth shaped by shared endurance. Travelers who come to Ireland today often speak of a feeling, a peace that seems to settle over them like a gentle blanket. It is in the land, yes, but also in the people, who carry the memory of hardship with grace and the gift of welcome with ease. To walk in Ireland is to walk alongside history, wrapped in mist and melody, rooted in survival and soft with song. And so, Ireland today is both itself and its memory, a living landscape of green, of grief remembered, and of life moving forward gently, step by step. The story of the Irish Potato Famine now rests quietly beside us. Like footsteps in soft soil, its traces remain, gentle, enduring, part of the landscape. Let us return once more to the misty hills of Ireland, where the stone walls stretch across fields like quiet lines of memory, and the early morning light settles tenderly on damp grass. Picture a small cottage, restored and simple, standing at the edge of a green ridge. Smoke rises gently from its chimney. Inside, a kettle hums softly on the stove. The scent of turf and tea fills the air. A child reads by the hearth, and outside, an elder tends a garden that blossoms in the softest colors: pale bluebells, yellow primrose, wild roses by the fence. The land is no longer in hunger. It breathes with calm. And in that breath, you can hear the echoes, the lullabies once sung beside empty pots, the stories told to keep warmth alive, the tunes played on quiet evenings when hope seemed far, but never gone. Let those sounds drift gently now across your thoughts. Let them soften into mist, into melody, into peace. The story we shared tonight is one of deep endurance, of quiet kindness, and of life that continued, even when the path forward was unclear. Ireland, like all of us, has known both sorrow and strength, and it is in remembering gently that we honor both. The fields we walked together tonight were shaped by hands that tilled with love, voices that carried across time, and hearts that continued to beat with soft determination. That story, like the hills themselves, is still unfolding, green, rooted, alive. So now, as your eyes grow heavy, return to that quiet ridge. Let your thoughts settle beside the warm fire. Let the stillness of the land carry you into rest. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. I hope it brought you a little peace, a little wonder, and a little closer to rest. Until next time, sweet dreams.